These killings weren't random brutality. Someone was reenacting a discipline, step by step, using tools that required specialist knowledge to even recognize. The trail didn't just lead to a person or a motive. It led to an institution with a long memory. He looked at Baker. Thank you. This was more helpful than you know. The apartment search. Cash and Colcord flew to San Francisco to search Castillo's apartment. The SFPD had already been through it, but they didn't know what they were looking for. Cash and Colcord did. The apartment was on the 7th floor of a low-rise building in the Marina district, with a wall of glass that looked out over the Golden Gate Bridge. It was July 4th, and the city was gearing up for fireworks, but the apartment was cold and still, the furniture covered in a thin layer of dust. Colcord noticed it first. Someone's been in here. Cash looked at him. SFPD. No, before them. Look at the bookshelves. The dust has been disturbed, but only slightly. Someone went through these shelves and then carefully replaced everything exactly where they found it. Weeks ago, from the dust pattern, Cash opened the freezer. It was empty, except for a bag of ice and 2 frozen steaks. She moved the steaks. Between them, tucked against the freezer wall, was a small key with a blue enamel bee and a stamped number. Battery Club, she said. They found the SWIFT code tucked between the pages of Castillo's tax returns 11 numbers, separated by spaces, written on a scrap of paper in Castillo's handwriting. Colcord photographed it. Cash pocketed the key. The club receptionist didn't want to let them in. Cash explained, in a voice that carried clearly across the lobby full of wealthy patrons, that she could either open the locker voluntarily or Cash could come back with a warrant and a news crew. The receptionist opened the locker. Inside, tucked into a rolled-up sock, was a stoppered glass vial. Inside the vial was a tiny brown square, smaller than a fingernail clipping. Dark, waxy, ancient, the relic of St. John the Baptist. Cash held it up to the light, and Colcord said, "You are making a lot of people very angry by taking that." "I'm taking it as evidence in a homicide investigation," Cash said. "The Pope can wait." The Armenian Ghost. The 3rd Street Tavern was empty, except for a man who looked like he had been melting into the bar for the past 20 years. Cash sat down across from Agent Standish, who was nursing a glass of wine with a grimace. "You found him," Cash said. "Khachatrian." The tech agent slid a photograph across the sticky table. A man in his 50s, olive-skinned, with dark hair going gray at the temples, stood on a cobblestone street beside a brightly painted ceramic rooster. "Barcelos rooster," Standish said. "Portuguese folk art. The blanket behind him is a traditional Portuguese pattern called a manta alentejana, and there's a half-eaten piece of São Jorge cheese on the table." "He's in Portugal." "Where in Portugal?" "I'm working on it, but there's more." He leaned forward. He looked jumpy, his usual arrogant confidence gone. "Khachatrian owns Paradox through a chain of shell companies, but I traced the ownership using Italy's anti-money laundering registry. He's an Armenian citizen. No digital trail, no social media. He's a ghost. How did you find the photo?" Standish hesitated. "He sent it to me. Encrypted message through an app that self-deletes after 48 hours. He knows I've been looking for him. He wanted to make contact." Cash's phone buzzed. A new notification from an app she didn't recognize. She opened it, and a chat screen appeared. "You have the relic. I know this because I have been watching you. So have others. You are in danger. The people who killed Javi and Willie are called Devotio. They are a Catholic sect. They want the relic because they believe it threatens their faith. Everything depends on sequencing that DNA. Do not return the relic to the Vatican until you have the results. Destroy this phone when you are done." Cash stared at the screen. The message had no signature, but it didn't need one. "Khachatrian," she said. Standish nodded. "He wants us to DNA test a piece of a saint's skull." "Because it's not a saint's skull," Cash said slowly. "At least, not the way they think it is." The chat app wiped itself from her phone as she watched. The screen went black, and the icon vanished. Whatever the Armenian had wanted her to know, he had told her. The rest was up to her. The secret test. Cash arrived at Romansky's bungalow in Cherry Creek at 9 o'clock at night. Nick Wu answered the door, took one look at her face, and said, "Oh no, I need to talk to your husband." Romansky was in the living room, reading. He listened as Cash explained what she needed, a DNA test on the relic conducted off the books without Director Holmes' knowledge or approval. Holmes had already refused the request. The relic was in the CBI evidence locker. If Cash was caught, she would lose her career. "If I'm caught," Romansky said, "it'll go down with you." I know. I wouldn't ask if it wasn't important. Someone's killing people for this relic, Nick said from the kitchen doorway. He was leaning against the frame, arms crossed, his expression curious. If they're willing to kill for it, maybe there's a reason. Maybe the DNA is that reason. Romansky looked at his husband, then at Cash. You're both crazy. Is that a yes? Cash asked. Romansky sighed. It's a yes. They did the work between 11 at night and 4 in the morning, when the lab was empty and the building was quiet. Romansky extracted the DNA while the forensic tech Mike Reno, a guy with a handlebar mustache and tattooed arms, ran the PCR amplification. The sample was ancient, fragile, and deeply contaminated. Centuries of handling had left traces of skin cells and microbes and God knew what else on the surface of the bone. But there was DNA there. Faint, degraded, real. Too contaminated for our equipment, the tech said, staring at the screen. I need to take it to the ancient DNA lab at CU Anschutz. My friend Greg Strickland runs it. He can get a clean sequence. Can you go now? Romansky asked. The tech nodded. He sealed the sample, packed it into a transport case, and headed for the parking lot. It was 4 in the morning. The sky was beginning to lighten in the east. He unlocked his car and got in. He didn't notice the figure in the back seat until a hand closed over his shoulder from behind and something hard pressed against the base of his skull. CBI has something we want, the voice said, low and calm. The hand tightened. And you are going to get it for us. The body at the mill. The call came in at 7:30. An abandoned mill on the outskirts of town. The kind of place teenagers went to drink and smoke and break things. A dog walker had seen the body through the broken window. Colcord got there first. He recognized the Audi in the gravel lot, the engine still ticking as it cooled. He called Cash, told her to hurry, and then went inside alone. The mill was dark and smelled of old sawdust and rust. The body was laid out on a wooden table in the center of the main room. The dead man was dressed in a white linen gown. Silver dollars were pressed into his eyes. His lips had been sewn into a smile. His left foot was crushed, the bones flattened into a pulp of blood and tissue. He had been embalmed alive. The smell of the chemicals still hung in the air. Cash arrived 10 minutes later. Colcord tried to stop her at the door, but she pushed past him and walked into the mill. She saw the white gown. She saw the silver dollars. She called Reno's name, her voice cracking, and then she saw his face. She tried CPR. She knew it was useless. The livor mortis was already fixed, the body already stiff, but she couldn't stop. Colcord watched her compress his chest. 1, 2, 3, and finally pulled her back. Cash dropped to her knees. She put her hands over her face, and for the first time since Colcord had known her, she cried. The relic recovered. Holmes attended the autopsy. She stood at the back of the room with her arms crossed while Huizinga worked, her face a mask of controlled anger. Cash was not there. Colcord was not there. Only Holmes, Huizinga, and Romansky, who had been told what was about to be found. Huizinga opened the stomach. She removed the contents with steady, careful hands. The communion wafers were there, exactly as they had been, with grooms undigested, stamped with the Lamb of Christ. The wine was there, the smell of it sharp and sweet in the cold air of the autopsy suite. And then Huizinga's forceps closed around something small and hard. She lifted it out of the stomach contents, rinsed it under the faucet, and held it up to the light. A plastic vial. Inside it, a small brown square. The relic. Explain this, Holmes said. Her voice was quiet, but the temperature in the room dropped. Romansky's face was pale. Reno had the relic. He was taking it to get tested without authorization, without chain of custody, without my knowledge. Holmes turned to face him. Who authorized this? No one spoke. Holmes looked at the vial in Huizinga's hand. The relic. The thing that 3 men had now died over. The thing that had brought Vatican agents to Colorado and drawn a secret Catholic sect out of the shadows. Get Cash in my office, Holmes said. Now. The removal. Cash stood in front of Holmes's desk with her hands behind her back and her face carefully blank. Holmes didn't ask her to sit down. You went behind my back, Holmes said. You ordered an unauthorized DNA test on evidence that I specifically instructed you not to touch. You involved 2 forensic technicians in your scheme, one of whom is now dead. Cash didn't deny it. She couldn't. Reno's death is on you, Holmes said. If you hadn't sent him out with that relic at 4 in the morning, he would still be alive. Do you understand that? Cash's jaw tightened. Yes, I should fire you. I should have you charged. The only reason I'm not is because it would destroy the case we've built against Margie Brooksfield, and frankly, because I think you're the only person who has any idea what's actually happening here." Holmes stood up. She was a tall woman, and when she leaned across the desk, her face was close to Cash's. "You are off the Shrouder investigation, effective immediately. Standish will take over as my deputy. You will surrender your case files by end of day. You will not enter the lab. You will not access evidence. You will go home, and you will stay there. Director, if you fight me on this," Holmes said, "I will end your career. I don't care how good a cop you are. I don't care what you think is out there. You got a good man killed. That is the only fact that matters." Cash walked out of Holmes' office into the empty hallway. She stood there for a long time, her hands shaking, her mind running through everything she had learned and everything she still didn't know. Devotio, Khachatryan, the Relic. The DMA that the Armenian had insisted was the key to everything. The killers had tortured Reno trying to get the relic back. They had cut him open, fed him communion wafers, and embalmed him alive, all for a piece of bone the size of a fingernail. And now that bone was back in evidence, locked in a safe, while Cash was locked out of the investigation. She thought about Castillo's body in 4 suitcases at the bottom of Macmillan Lake, but she thought about Groom's crushed foot and sewn-shut smile. She thought about the message from Khachatryan. Everything depends on sequencing that DNA. The test had only just begun. The real results, the results that Dr. Strickland could get from the ancient DNA lab, were still out there, incomplete, unexplored, and Cash was the only person who knew that. She walked out of the CBI building and into the hot Colorado afternoon. The sky was blue and cloudless. The mountains rose in the distance like sleeping giants. Somewhere in the flat tops, there was a lake with something hidden at its bottom. Somewhere in the shadows, a group called Devotio was hunting for a relic that threatened everything they believed, and somewhere in Portugal, an Armenian ghost was waiting for a phone call that might never come. Cash got into her car. She didn't go home. She drove toward the mountains instead, toward the high passes and the dark lakes and the answers that were still buried in the granite. She was off the case. It didn't matter. She was going to find the truth anyway. In Rome, Brother Padraig knelt in the side chapel of San Silvestro and prayed before the wax head of St. John the Baptist. The missing fragment had not been replaced. The saw-cut edges were still visible if you looked closely. The bone dust had been swept away, but the absence remained. He prayed for the relic's return. He prayed for the soul of the man who had stolen it. He prayed for the safety of the brother the Vatican had sent to retrieve it. Outside the chapel, the city of Rome was waking up. Inside, the candle flames flickered in their red glass holders, and the wax face of the saint stared up at the vaulted ceiling with blank, sightless eyes. The fragment was in Colorado now, locked in a CBI evidence safe. But it would not stay there long. Someone was coming for it. Someone who believed that a piece of a saint's skull could hold the secret to the universe. Someone who would kill again to possess it, too. And in a small apartment in Cherry Creek, Detective Bart Romansky sat at his kitchen table and stared at a printout of the preliminary DNA results from the night before the tech died. The numbers were garbled, the sequences were contaminated, but there was something in the data that he couldn't explain, a pattern that didn't belong to any human genome, something that looked almost synthetic, almost designed. He folded the printout and put it in his pocket. He didn't know what it meant yet, but he had a feeling that when he found out, everything would change. Episode 3, The Artifact at the Bottom of Solitary Lake. The forensics building was dark when Cash swiped her access card at 4 in the morning. She walked straight to the evidence freezer and dialed Romansky's code 474,747, the same number he used for everything. The lock clicked open. The vial sat in a small evidence tube on the middle shelf, a tiny brown square of bone, half the size of a pinky nail, the skull fragment of St. John the Baptist. Cash slid the tube into her pocket and replaced it with an identical one she had prepared that afternoon, a vial containing a chip of tree bark, the same color and size. She was out the door in 90 seconds. Dr. Greg Strickland lived alone in a house on the edge of a marsh. When Cash arrived at 10 that night, he opened the door with red-rimmed eyes. The news of Reno's death had hit him hard. They had been friends since graduate school. Strickland led her to a cramped home office cluttered with computer monitors. On a side table, the glass vial containing the skull fragment sat in a padded case. "I ran the samples 6 times," he said. 6 separate extractions, 6 separate amplifications. The results were identical across all runs. Identical how? Contaminated. Hopelessly. The bone has been handled by thousands of people across 2 millennia. But the contamination isn't what kept me up last night. He pulled up a screen, bar charts and sequence alignments filled the monitor. When I stripped away the contamination and isolated the endogenous DNA, I got something that shouldn't exist. The sequences look synthetic, designed. They have patterns and regularities that don't appear in any natural human genome. Cash stared at the screen. What do you mean synthetic? I mean, it looks like someone built it, engineered it, but that's impossible. We can't synthesize a full human genome with any technology that exists on this planet. How old is it? Carbon-14 dating puts the sample at roughly 2,000 years. So this bone is 2,000 years old, and its DNA looks artificially constructed. I'm not saying that's what it is. I'm saying that's what the data suggests, and I can't explain it. The most likely answer is contamination. Because the alternative is what? The alternative is that someone engineered a human genome 2,000 years ago. Kesh drove back toward Burns with the vial in her pocket. The DNA was impossible. The bone was impossible. And yet 3 men were dead, killed with medieval torture devices by a secret Catholic sect that believed this fragment of skull threatened their entire faith. Dome Peak. The next morning, Cash hiked alone into the Flat Tops wilderness. The trail to Edge Lake was steep and rocky, climbing through pine forest into thin alpine air. By the time she reached the slope below Dome Peak, the area where the camper Robert Drew had seen lights on the night of Groom's murder, her lungs burned. She found the boot print in a patch of mud beside a snowfield. Size 11, same as the prints the killers had left at the Brooksfield Ranch. Cash photographed it with a pawnshop camera and kept climbing. The groove was harder to find. It lay on a flat slab of granite near the base of a small cliff, partially hidden by a collapsed scree pile. Cash almost missed it. The rock was weathered and cracked, covered in lichen and glacial striations. But the groove was different. It was straight, perfectly straight, 3 feet long, half an inch wide, cut into the granite like a knife wound. She knelt and ran her finger along it. The edges were smooth, almost glassy. No chipping, no weathering. Whatever had made this groove had done so recently within weeks or months. The glacial striations around it were ancient, soft-edged from millennia of erosion. This cut was sharp and fresh. She looked up. The groove pointed directly at a cluster of Engelmann spruce on the ridge above, trees that had been snapped off halfway up their trunks. Something had come through here at tremendous speed, carving a path through solid granite and dense timber. Cash sat on a boulder and stared at the groove. Her rational mind told her this was nonsense. Rocks cracked, trees fell, mountains eroded, but the boot print was real, the groove was real, and the relic in her pocket contained DNA that a trained geneticist could not explain. The argument. Colcord was fly fishing on Brush Creek when Cash found him. He stood thigh-deep in the current, his Stetson pulled low against the sun. "You look peaceful," Cash said from the bank. "I was." He reeled in his line and waded toward her, his face wary. "What's going on?" Cash sat on a fallen log and told him everything. The theft from the evidence freezer. The DNA results synthetic sequences, engineered patterns, carbon dating that placed the bone at 2,000 years old, the boot print on Dome Peak, and the groove in the granite, and the trees that had been snapped like matchsticks. Colcord listened without interruption. When she finished, he stood very still. "You're telling me," he said slowly, "that you broke into a CBI evidence locker, stole a piece of a saint's skull, got a secret DNA test that shows it was genetically engineered 2,000 years ago, and now you think there was a UFO crash on Dome Peak?" "Yes, and you want me to believe all of this? I want you to help me find the object that Grooms hid at the lake. It's still there. The killers haven't found it." Colcord shook his head. "You're off the case. Holmes will crucify you. Worse than crucify Shell have you arrested. You'll lose your badge. I'm aware. And you're going anyway. Yes." He looked at her for a long moment. The creek burbled. "I can't go with you. I've got a department to run. I've got a family to think about. This is crazy, Frankie. You hear yourself, and you know it sounds crazy." Cash held his gaze. "When Groom's body was on that table, you told me this was the strangest case you'd ever seen. You were right. It's stranger than either of us imagined. But the answers are still out there." She turned and walked back toward the trail. Solitary Lake. Cash drove the Forest Service road through gusting wind and driving rain. By the time she reached the trailhead, the sky was dark as slate and the trees were thrashing. She pulled on a rain jacket and shoved her Glock into a waterproof holster. The hike to the lake took 40 minutes. The trail, a ribbon of Mudgroom's junk sculptures, loomed out of the trees. The skeleton made of rebar, the horned monster of old tires, the china doll with a beetle crawling from its mouth. The cabin was empty. The crime scene tape had been taken down. Cash searched the cabin first, under the floorboards, inside the mattress, behind the loose stones of the fireplace. Nothing. She searched the shed. Nothing. She walked the shoreline, peering under overhanging rocks. Then she saw the canoe pulled up on the far shore, half hidden in a thicket of willow. On the seat, wedged beneath a life jacket, was a map. Hand-drawn, the ink smeared but legible. It showed Solitary Lake with an X marked near the center, and beneath the X a single word: buoy. Cash looked out at the lake. In the center, bobbing wildly, was a small stick that did not belong, a piece of plastic, cleverly carved and painted to look like a floating branch tethered to something below. She launched the canoe. The wind caught her immediately, pushing her sideways. The waves were 2 feet high, slopping over the gunnels. Cash dug her paddle deep, fighting for every yard. The buoy was 20 feet away. 10. 5. She reached out and grabbed it. A heavy fishing line ran from the bottom of the buoy into the dark water. Cash hauled on the line, hand over hand, until a small yellow rubber dry bag broke the surface. She had just pulled it into the canoe when the first shot cracked over her head. Cash dropped flat, clutching the dry bag to her chest. On the shore, 4 figures emerged from the trees. One of them, a bald man in dark clothing, raised a rifle and fired again. The bullet punched through the hole near Cash's feet, and water began gushing in. Then another sound, the roar of an engine, the crash of brush being forced aside. Colcord's sheriff's bronco burst onto the shore, its lights flashing. Colcord was out the door before the vehicle stopped moving, his rifle barking twice. The attackers scattered. Colcord. 2 of them returned fire. Colcord dove behind the bronco, but he was outnumbered. Cash watched, helpless, as the 2 shooters closed on him from opposite sides. She heard a cry, saw Colcord go down, saw them drag him toward the cabin. A gray-haired priest and a large monk moved for the cabin door. A bald man in dark clothing stayed on the porch with a rifle. A woman with a scarred face followed the others inside. Cash wanted to paddle back. Every instinct screamed at her to turn around, to save him. But Colcord had bought her time. She was the one with the artifact. She was the one they wanted. Cash drove her paddle into the water and stroked for the far shore. The rescue. Cash had not fled. She landed the canoe on the eastern shore, hid it in the willows, and crept back through the forest toward the cabin. The dry bag was strapped to her chest beneath her jacket. The storm covered the sound of her approach. She reached the edge of the clearing just in time to see the bald man step out onto the porch, rifle in hand. Cash drew her Glock and waited. The decoy was simple. She draped her yellow raincoat over a branch and tied a length of fishing line from the branch to a cluster of wind chimes hanging from the porch eave. When she pulled the line, the raincoat moved in the bushes and the chimes clattered. The bald man turned. He raised his rifle and walked toward the sound. He passed within 10 feet of Cash's position. She shot him once in the chest. He went down without a sound. The scarred woman was next. She appeared in the doorway, a pistol in her hand. She saw the bald man's body and fired blindly into the trees. Cash circled around, came at the cabin from the side, and kicked open the back door. The woman spun. Cash fired. The woman fired. Cash's shot went wide. The woman's shot clipped Cash's sleeve. Then they were on each other, grappling and punching, the pistol clattering away. The woman got her hands around Cash's throat and squeezed. Cash kneed her in the stomach, rolled, reached for her Glock, and put 2 rounds into the woman's chest. Then she was up and moving, into the main room where Colcord lay on the table, the same table where Grooms had died. His foot was a ruin of blood and crushed bone. The gray-haired priest and a large monk in Benedictine robes, Brother Gregory, the skiing monk Cash had heard about from Father Moore, were gone, fled through the front door. "Frankie," Colcord croaked, "I'm here, hold still." She caught the ropes with a knife from the bald man's belt. Colcord tried to sit up and collapsed. His foot would not bear weight. Cash hauled him upright, draped his arm over her shoulder, and half carried, half dragged him out the back door toward the lake. The canoe was where she had left it. She lowered Colcord into the bow, shoved off from shore, and began paddling. Behind them, the cabin receded into the trees. Then she saw the other canoe. The gray-haired Devotio priest was in the bow, a small man with a dripping cassock plastered to his thin frame. The large monk paddled hard behind him. They were faster. The distance was shrinking. Gunfire cracked. A bullet hit the water beside the canoe. Another splintered the gunwale. Colcord raised Cash's Glock and fired back, his shots wild and desperate, and then Cash saw the waterfall, a thin white ribbon falling from a granite ledge into the lake. Behind the falling water, a shadow, a dark space that might have been a cave. "Hold on," Cash said. She drove the canoe straight at the waterfall. The mine, the water hit them like a physical blow, cold and heavy, and then they were through. Cash blinked water from her eyes and saw what lay beyond, a tunnel carved into the mountain, its walls glistening with quartz. A mine shaft, one of the old gold mines that honeycombed the flat tops. The canoe scraped to a halt on a gravel beach. Cash hauled Colcord out, and he collapsed onto the stones. She pulled out her flashlight and swept the beam down the tunnel. 50 feet in, she found a pile of modern equipment. A gas monitor, oxygen masks, a generator. The gas monitor was still running. Its digital display glowed in the dark. 13% CH3, 5% CO2. Both numbers were in the red zone. Then she heard sounds from the waterfall voices, the scrape of a canoe. Cash dragged Colcord deeper into the mine, past the equipment, into a dead-end chamber where the tunnel widened into a rough circle. The walls glittered with fool's gold. A faint wisp of gas drifted from a crack in the floor. She propped Colcord against the wall and gave him an oxygen mask. There was only one. Footsteps echoed in the tunnel. The Devotio priest and the monk emerged into the chamber, their faces lit by a lantern. "The artifact," the monk said. His voice was calm, almost pleasant. "Give it to us, and we will let you leave." "You'll kill us either way," Cash said. "You killed Grooms, you killed Castillo, you killed Reno. You were about to embalm Colcord alive." The Devotio priest stepped forward. "Yes, we are going to kill you. The question is whether we do so without the artifact or with it." Cash unstrapped the dry bag from her chest. She held it up, a small, yellow cylinder, still sealed, still dry. She reached inside and pulled out the object. It was a cue ball, white and spherical, with a faint purplish sheen that shifted in the lantern light. It was slightly egg-shaped, and when Cash held it, she felt a warmth radiating from its surface. "This is what Grooms found at the crash site," she said. "The thing you've been killing people for." She threw it at the Devotio priest. He caught it reflexively. For a moment, nothing happened. Then his face changed. His eyes went wide, his mouth opened, and he let out a sound that was not quite a scream. The ball glowed, a soft purple light pulsing under his fingers, and the priest dropped to his knees, his body trembling. The monk lunged forward. His hand touched the ball, and the monk froze too, caught in the same paralysis. The lantern fell and guttered out, leaving only the purple glow of the artifact illuminating the chamber. Cash grabbed Colcord and pulled him behind the generator. Methane. The monitor had been reading 13% methane. The gas was pooling in this chamber, invisible and explosive. She raised her Glock and aimed at the artifact. Colcord grabbed her arm. "Frankie, know the methane. If I fire into this room, you'll kill us all. If I don't, they kill us." She fired. The flash from the muzzle ignited the methane instantly. The chamber became a fireball white heat, a roar that swallowed every other sound. Kesh felt herself slammed back against the wall, heard the thunder of the ceiling collapsing, and then everything went black. The knowledge. Cash swam back into consciousness through a fog of pain. Her ears were ringing, her mouth was full of dust. She opened her eyes and saw nothing, absolute darkness. "Colcord," she croaked. A groan from somewhere to her left. "Here, I'm here." She crawled toward his voice and found him still propped against the wall, still wearing the oxygen mask, a trickle of blood running down his forehead. The explosion had collapsed the back half of the chamber. Where the Devotio priest and the monk had been, there was only a wall of broken rock. "We need to get out of here," Cash said. She got Colcord's arm over her shoulder and started dragging him toward the tunnel entrance. They were 20 feet from the entrance when a figure appeared in the darkness ahead. A man, soaked through, his clerical collar askew, a flashlight shaking in his hand. "Agent Cash," Father Moore said. "Sheriff Colcord. Thank God." Father Moore hurried forward, his boots crunching on the gravel. "Brother Gregory took devices from my collection." The Spanish boot. "When St. Mary's was empty this morning, I knew I followed the tire tracks. Help us," Cash said. "Colcord's foot is crushed." Father Moore took Colcord's other arm. Together they half-carried him through the waterfall and into the waiting canoe. The lake was calm now. The storm passed. The surface a mirror reflecting a sky of broken clouds. Cash pushed off and paddled toward the distant shore. The object was on the floor of the canoe. Cash did not remember picking it up, but there it lay, the cue ball. its surface cold and unmoving. And then it began to warm. Cash looked down. A faint purple light was kindling again in the sphere's depths, pulsing like a heartbeat. She tried to drop it, but her fingers would not obey. The warmth spread up her arms, into her chest, into her head, and the understanding arrived not as words, but as a shape, something vast and precise that pressed into her chest like a second heartbeat, cold and undeniable. She knew what she was holding, and it made her stomach turn. Colcord had seen the light, too. He reached out, his blood-stained hand closing over the sphere, and his body went rigid. His eyes widened, and tears cut tracks through the dust on his face. And then Father Moore, who had been watching in horror, reached forward and touched the glowing surface. All three of them froze, connected through the artifact. Cash felt the knowledge settling into her, rearranging her thoughts, a truth she could not have articulated and would never be able to forget. She could feel the weight of it behind her ribs, cold and certain. Then the light went out, the sphere cooled. Cash found herself gasping, tears streaming down her face. Colcord was weeping too. Father Moore had pressed his hands together in prayer. None of them spoke for a long time. It was Father Moore who broke the silence. "We cannot tell anyone." "No one can know what we just learned." Cash nodded. She could not have spoken if she tried. "This would destroy the church," Father Moore continued. "Not just the church. Every religion. Every belief system. Everything. They would tear each other apart," Colcord whispered. "Or worse." Father Moore took the artifact from Cash's hand. He held it up to the light one last time, and then he dropped it over the side of the canoe. The sphere hit the water with a small final splash. It sank immediately, descending through the clear water into the darkness beyond. Cash watched the purple light flicker once in the depths and then vanish. "It's over," Colcord said. "It's not over," Cash said, "but it's done." Coda. The silence. Brother Armagh arrived at the Eagle County Sheriff's Office on a Tuesday morning. Colcord sat behind his desk in a wheelchair, his right foot wrapped in bandages. He opened his safe and withdrew a small evidence box containing the glass vial with the fragment of skull. "Half a centimeter square," Colcord said. 2,000 years old. "The killers wanted it. 2 men died trying to protect it. I'm giving it to you with the understanding that it goes back to San Silvestro and stays there." Brother Armagh took the vial. His hands trembled. "The men who stole it, Castillo, De Silva, what happened to them?" "Dead, both of them. The people who killed them are dead too." When Armagh had gone, Colcord sat looking at the empty safe for a long time. In his basement lab at the CU Anschutz Medical Campus, Dr. Greg Strickland stared at his computer screen. Cash had told him to destroy the data, all 6 runs, the sequence files, the backup drives. He had agreed. He had even begun the process, but he had not finished. On the screen was a single file, encrypted and hidden inside a password-protected folder. Inside it was the complete DNA sequence of the bone, the synthetic patterns, the engineered methylations, the impossible structures. The basement of St. Mary's Church was cold and smelled of old incense. Cash wheeled Colcord past the altar and down a narrow staircase to a room that Father Moore unlocked with a heavy iron key. Shelves lined the walls, displaying Inquisition-era artifacts. On a wooden stand in the center, an empty space had been marked with a placard, SPANISHBOOT 16THCENTURY. "Devotio," Cash said. "They were here, in your church, using your collection." Father Moore bowed his head. "I was a vain, foolish old man. I wanted to preserve the old ways. I did not understand what the old ways could become in the wrong hands." Colcord looked at the empty stand, then turned to the priest. "Father Moore, we need to talk about what happened in the canoe." Father Moore's face went pale. "I have not spoken of it. I will not speak of it." "Neither will I," Colcord said. He looked at Cash. "Neither of us will." They stood in silence for a moment. The artifact was at the bottom of Solitary Lake. The killers were dead. The relic was returning to Rome, and the 3 of them shared a secret that none of them would ever reveal. "I didn't believe in anything before this case," Cash said quietly. "After Erebus, I was done with faith, with meaning, with the idea that there was a plan. And now?" Colcord asked. "Now I know there's a plan. I just don't know if it's one I want any part of." On Sunday morning at the Orr House, someone turned up the television. Reporter Robin Twen's face filled the frame. They were standing in front of a municipal building in Portland, Maine. New evidence has emerged in the case of former Portland CID detective Frankie Cash, whose controversial termination made national headlines. According to documents obtained by this reporter, Cash was forced out of the department after refusing to falsify her account of an officer-involved shooting. Further investigation has revealed that Cash's commanding officer, Ruby Barsconi, was engaged in a relationship with Chief Eric Mezzi at the time of the termination. Cash walked through the door wearing a yellow sundress and sandals, her arm in a sling. Every head in the Orr house turned toward the television, then toward Cash. When the segment ended, someone started clapping. The rest of the room joined in. Colcord wheeled out from behind the counter and stopped beside her. "Local hero?" he said quietly. "Told ya, I'm not a hero. No, you're a pain in the ass. But you're also the best cop I've ever worked with." Cash looked at him at the wheelchair, the bandaged foot, the Stetson that she had retrieved from the lake and paid a hat maker to restore. She had given it to him that morning. "Thank you," she said, "for coming to the lake. You'd have done the same for me." "I did do the same for you." Colcord smiled. "Yeah, you did." Outside, the Colorado sun was shining. The mountains rose blue and gold in the distance. Somewhere, in the flat tops, Solitary Lake glittered in the morning light, and at its bottom, an object that had fallen from the stars lay silent in the dark. Cash did not look toward the mountains. She had made a vow. She would keep it. But sometimes, in the quiet hours before dawn, she would wake with the taste of knowledge on her tongue and the memory of purple light behind her eyes. She would lie in the dark and wonder if they had done the right thing. She would wonder if the plan was still unfolding somewhere in ways she could not see, and she would wonder if the silence could hold. Here's what you should know about who wrote this. Douglas Preston and Alethea Preston co-authored Paradox. It's their first book together. Preston has built a career on meticulously researched thrillers, the Pendergast series with Lincoln Child, the nonfiction account The Lost City of the Monkey God. But Paradox is a standalone, not part of any franchise. It's also his first collaboration with a family member, and his first novel to put a theological question at the center of its engine. Where the Pendergast books lean Baroque and operatic, Paradox runs on forensic detail, high-altitude survival, and a silence that grows heavier with every chapter. The novel's seed, according to the dedication, came from Alethea. What grew from it is a thriller about inheriting knowledge so destabilizing that the people who receive it decide to stop the chain. Cash, Colcord, and Father Moore, three characters who span generations and carry incompatible beliefs, each touch the artifact. Each learns something the novel never translates into words. You only see what the knowledge does to them and what they do with it. They sink the object in a mountain lake and vow never to speak of it again. A father and daughter wrote a story about a secret that passes from an older generation to a younger one, then stops cold. You, the listener, become the fourth person in the canoe. For a few hours, you feel the weight of something that would crack every religion on Earth. Then the story ends. Strickland encrypted the DNA data against Cash's orders. Kashatrian disappeared, but Paradox likely continues. Artifact is hidden, not destroyed. The knowledge is not gone, it's held in silence. You get to decide if they were right to bury it. Preston has written bigger books, faster books, books with clearer villains. But Paradox is the one that leaves its central question in your lap and refuses to take it back. A father and daughter built it that way together. Of silence in the book is their choice too. Your silence, after you close it, is yours.